Last time, I tested 6 fish PetSmart sells as algae eaters. The Bristlenose Won, clear winner. Algae score dropped from 8 to 1. I thought that was the end of the story. It wasn't, because there's a type of algae none of these 6 fish touch. And the fish that's supposed to handle it, most stores don't even sell the real one. This is Blackbeard algae. If you've never dealt with it, count yourself lucky.
Oh yes.
If you have, you already know where this video is going. BBA doesn't respond to the blackout method. It barely responds to chemical treatments at safe doses. And here's the part that connects directly to my last video. None of the 6 winners from that experiment eat it. Not the bristlenose, not the Otocinclus, not the nerite snail. All 4 of those handle soft algae and diatoms beautifully. None of them touch BBA. There is one fish that does, reliably. It's been documented for decades by serious planted tank keepers. It's called the Siamese Algae Eater. And here's the twist. When I went back to PetSmart and asked for one by name, what I actually got in the bag was a fish I'd already tested. I'm going to show you exactly what happened, how to tell the real one from the fakes, and the one management mistake that makes even the correct fish stop working. If you watched the last video, subscribe right now so you don't miss where this goes. Let's finish the story. Quick recap of the framework, because it matters for what's coming. Algae isn't one thing, it's a category. The same way algae eater is a category. Soft green algae and diatoms, the film on glass and leaf surfaces, are the algae most algae eater fish actually handle. That's what my last experiment tested. Blackbeard algae is different. It's a red algae species that appears dark, almost black, and attaches itself to surfaces with a structure tough enough to resist most grazers and most chemical treatments at fish-safe doses. It's the algae that makes people quit the hobby. And it requires a specific biological predator, not a general one. For anyone who missed the last video, here's the 30-second version. I tested 6 algae eater labeled organisms against soft algae for 30 days. Final scores, 8 being heaviest algae coverage, 1 being nearly clean. Bristlenose Pleco, 8 to 1. Best overall for soft algae and diatoms. Otocinclus catfish, 8 to 2. Excellent precision grazer, needs an established tank and a group. Nerite snail, 8 to 3. Best non-fish option, doesn't reproduce in fresh water. Mystery snail, 8 to 6. Modest, passive supplement only. Common Pleco, 8 to 5. Works short term, becomes a 24-inch problem within 18 months. Chinese Algae Eater, 8 to 6. After dropping to 4 and rebounding. Works for about 2 weeks, then stops grazing almost entirely. That last one, the Chinese Algae Eater, is about to become very relevant again. So I went back to PetSmart, specifically to buy a Siamese Algae Eater for a BBA tank. The tank was labeled correctly. The fish inside looked the part, slender, torpedo-shaped, a dark horizontal stripe running the length of the body. I bought 4, brought them home, set them up in a 30-gallon planted tank with an active Blackbeard algae outbreak, the same dark, wiry growth I showed you at the start. then I did something most people never do. I checked the stripe. Here's the single most useful piece of identification knowledge in this entire video. The genuine Siamese Algae Eater, Crossocheilus oblongus, has one defining feature: a continuous black stripe that runs from the tip of the nose all the way through the tail fin itself. Not stopping at the base of the tail, continuing into the fin tissue. Two fish get sold under the same name and look extremely close at a glance. The flying fox has a stripe that stops cleanly at the base of the tail. It does not continue into the fin. It also eats algae selectively and largely ignores BBA. The Chinese Algae Eater, the same fish from my last video, the one whose algae eating dropped off a cliff at day 13, has a less defined stripe and a different body profile on close inspection. I checked all 4 of my new fish. 2 had stripes that ran cleanly into the tail fin. 2 stopped at the base. Out of 4 fish sold under one name, in one tank, at one store, I got 2 different species. I separated them by identification and tracked the BBA coverage on the same driftwood piece. Scored 1 to 10, 10 being heaviest coverage. Day 0. BBA score 9. Heavy, established growth across multiple surfaces. By day 15, the section of driftwood near where the 2 genuine Crossocheilus were grazing showed visible BBA recession. Score dropped to 6 in that zone. They result landy, that section was down to a 2. The dark, wiry growth had visibly thinned and in places disappeared entirely, revealing the wood underneath. The zones where the flying fox-type fish spent most of their time? BBA score at day 30, 7, barely moved. Same water, same starting algae. 2 different outcomes, because 2 different species came home in the same bag, sold under the same label. This is the part of the hobby nobody warns you about. Before the final twist, subscribe right now if you haven't. The next video is the complete Blackbeard Algae Elimination Guide. Every method that actually works, the ones that don't, and exactly how to source genuine livestock when a label can't be trusted. Here's where this connects back to everything. Both videos, both experiments. I had 2 genuine Siamese Algae Eaters making real progress on BBA through day 30. By day 60, they'd almost completely stopped. My first thought was, maybe these are like the Chinese Algae Eaters. Maybe this is another maturity cliff. It wasn't. It was something simpler. And it's the same thing that quietly limits every single organism from both experiments, including the bristlenose, the otos, and the neorites from video 1. I got it wrong too. I was feeding the tank too well. Twice a day, generous portions, every fish well fed every time. Algae grazers, every single one across both videos preferentially choose prepared food over algae when prepared food is reliably available. If your fish are never hungry, grazing stops being worth the effort. I switched to feeding every other day, only what the tank could consume in 2 to 3 minutes. Within 2 weeks, the genuine SAEs were back on the driftwood, grazing actively. The BBA score on that section dropped from a plateaued 2 down towards 0 by day 90. This single management detail, feeding discipline, may be the actual difference between a cleanup crew that works and a cleanup crew that used to work. It might even explain part of what happened with the Chinese Algae Eater in video 1. Its day 13 collapse is documented as a maturity-driven behavioral shift, but an overfed tank accelerates exactly that kind of disengagement in every grazing species. 2 compounding causes, same outcome. A fish that stops doing the job you bought it for. Here's what both experiments together actually tell you. For soft algae and diatoms, bristlenose, Otocinclus, and nearite snails remain the top 3. That result didn't change. For Blackbeard algae specifically, genuine Crossocheilus oblongus is the only organism across both experiments that made a measurable dent. But genuine is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because the label alone does not guarantee what's in the bag. For every single one of these organisms, regardless of species, feeding discipline is the variable that determines whether they actually work long-term. Full bellies mean idle grazers. That's true for the $1.50 nearite snail and the $5 Siamese Algae Eater equally. Algae Eater was never one category. We established that in the last video. What this video adds is something more uncomfortable. Even when you know exactly which species you need, even when you walk into the store and ask for it by name on a correctly labeled tank, there's a real chance you walk out with something else entirely. 2 fish, same bag, different species, because the supply chain upstream of that store doesn't sort them reliably. And even if you get the right one, there's a single daily habit, feeding, that determines whether it ever does the job at all. The label was never the information. The species wasn't even guaranteed to match the label. And the fish, any fish, only works if you let it be a little bit hungry. If you're dealing with Blackbeard algae right now, check the stripe. Tip of the nose, all the way through the tail fin, no gap. That's the only fish in this entire 2-part series that's documented to handle BBA reliably. And if you already have a cleanup crew that's stopped working, bristlenose, otos, snails, anything from either video, before you assume the fish is broken or the species was wrong, try cutting feeding to every other day for 2 weeks. It's the cheapest fix in both of these videos, and it might be the only one that actually matters long-term. Subscribe right now if you haven't. The complete Blackbeard Algae Elimination Guide drops next. And drop a comment. Did you check the stripe on your Siamese Algae Eater? What did you find? I have a feeling this comment section is going to be very informative.